Hello everybody. Welcome to the third official meeting of the Greater Church of Lucifer in Toronto. Thanks everybody for making it out on a holiday weekend in the summer on a beautiful day. We have a couple really excellent talks planned for today. The first is Shawn's, and that will be on the left-hand path compared with the right-hand path. And the second talk will be Sfinga's talk, and this will be comparing the Holy Guardian Angel as found in the book of Abramelin the Mage and the familiar spirit of the traditional craft. So I guess we might as well go ahead and get started. Shawn?
I guess I should come up.
Yep.
Why do I feel like I'm marching to be shot? Alright, well, first of all, my name is Shawn and I'm an alcoholic. Oh wait, wrong meeting. Yeah, definitely wrong meeting. Okay, so I'm going to try and go through this. I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be, and I'm suffering from some anxiety, but I'm all afraid of you, so it's all good. And I'll probably be reading from my notes more than speaking extempore because I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be. But I would like to give you a brief introduction into the left-hand path and the right-hand path, specifically the terminology. From what I understand, the terminology of the right-hand path and the left-hand path is taken from the Hindu Tantric literatures. From this tradition, the right-hand path denoted that cultural taboos would only be transcended symbolically, such as substituting a kiss for intercourse during a 5M rite, or things of that nature. The left-handed path would break these taboos in a literal, objective way. Sexual intercourse, usually with a caste inappropriate to the partner, eating beef, which would of course be a big no-no to any Hindu, things of that nature. It's about breaking boundaries and liberating yourself. It was not so much about morality as it was about the Tantrikas either honoring or challenging social norms. It was primarily the Theosophical Society, founded in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, that while bringing yoga and Asian philosophies to Europe and North America, they did manage to vilify Tantra and equate the left-handed path with a sinister, no pun intended, being the left hand, reputation. So, in modern interpretations of right-hand path and left-hand path, often the left-hand path is equated with black magic, satanic thinking, things of that nature. But when we go back to the source, it really did not have that kind of moralistic framework set to it. Again, it was more about whether you were going to honor your social norms and taboos or you're going to try and break them. Now I'm going to touch upon differences between the two paths. In modern occultism, especially involving branches of the Western mystery tradition, several beliefs have become attached to these schools, as I just mentioned actually. For example, the right-handed path is often equated with white magic, while the left-handed path is with black magic. It is also possible that the right-hand path practitioners aim to achieve union with, it has been postulated that right-hand path practitioners aim to achieve union with the Godhead, losing all individuality, and rejoining with the all upon death. Left-handed path practitioners are believed to desire to achieve apotheosis, or literally becoming their own god, self-deification, and retain some measure of individuality and life after death. I don't think that these are universally true, although such beliefs may be true on an individual basis. Going back to the Hindu roots, Theravada Buddhism, also known as the Hinayana or lesser vehicle, could be viewed as a conservative form of the right-hand path. Excuse me. Each individual seeking out their own enlightenment. Mahayana or Great Vehicle Buddhism has developed the concept of the Bodhisattva vow, a vow that the individual will not be reabsorbed into the Godhead until all other beings are enlightened as well. This can be seen as a left-handed path approach to what would normally be considered a right-handed path system, Buddhism. It is my assertion that both paths may share identical goals and practices. The crux of the difference lies in whether the practitioner wishes to honor and conserve societal taboos and cultural norms, traditionally of the right-hand path, or to reject and overcome them, the left-handed pathway. In the Western esoteric mystery schools, often based on the Kabbalah, the right-handed path could best be described as a practice known as rising on the planes or the middle pillar right. These are spiritual practices involving rising or ascending on one's own imagined vertical axis, straight up. Striving to expand one's consciousness until one ultimately slays the opposites or penetrates beyond duality into the monad or the godhood. While not a mere practice, Laya Yoga and several other yoga disciplines from the East describe a similar process. The left-handed path may use these methods, but the left-handed path is more often associated with a practice in the Western esoteric mystery schools as the path of the serpent. Rather than simply moving up the vertical axis, the practitioner explores all paths open to them. To use the tree of life as a model, which I hope you're all somewhat familiar with, for these practices, the rising on the planes method is strictly vertical, and the two paths, I missed the page here. Strictly vertical, like an arrow shot from Malkut, the kingdom, to Yesod, to Ferret, and finally to Keter, all the while traveling through the connecting pathways. Those following the path of the serpent would travel to all the Sephiroth, including the right pillar of mercy and the left path of severity. Because the path of the serpent seeks to experience all things, rather than going up the straight and narrow, it is often said that nothing is unnatural to practitioners of this methodology. They try and understand and absorb all things into themselves. Pardon me. In the Norse, or Pan-Germanic systems such as that of rune magic, there are a pair of concepts which are fairly significant to the concept of the left-handed path and the right-handed path. These are the Innegards and the Utengards. Innegards means within the enclosure or the magic circle, literally inside the yard. The Utengard means beyond or outside the enclosure of the circle. Innegard is orderly, civilized, law-abiding, etc. Respecting and conserving societal norms, taboos, etc. The Utengards are chaotic, antinomian, self-serving, etc. This dualistic way of looking at things may be applied to both external entities as well as conditions or aspects of self-realization. So we could talk about a wild spirit coming from the Utengards, or we could talk about the practitioner himself opening him up to things less societally bound and more wild or of their own shadow nature or their subconscious. Some individuals and traditions alike reject a division between the right-handed path and left-handed path. In fact, some traditions don't even acknowledge this as a viable way of looking at things. To some people, there is no black magic, there is no white magic, there's simply magic. Critics have put forward the argument that these are simply arbitrary constructs. Some of these critics liken the two pairs to the pair of hands which everyone is born with. They'll both serve their masters, depending on your focus, whether you choose to be right-handed or left-handed, and there's no irrevocable point of no return. You can always start using your left hand simultaneously or after you've used your right. To return to the Tree of Life model, the right-handed path can be likened to the Pillar of Mercy, which would be formulated by Netzach, Hesed, and Chokmah. And the left, and if I'm butchering any Jewish pronunciations, I do apologize. And the left-handed path may be attributed to the Pillar of Severity of Hod, Gevurah, and Binah. Jeremy Crow, our intrepid leader here, has made an interesting and poignant statement referring to what he calls the complete path, one which embraces both opposites, polar opposites of the right-handed path and the left-handed path. This holistic approach allows practitioners to freely connect the fruits of both paths equally, or in any manner he or she sees fit to do so. On the tree of life, the complete path would naturally equate to the middle pillar, which is formulated in the kingdom Malkut, up from Yusod to Tiferet and finally Keter. Of course, again, if you're following the complete path, you're not going to stick wholly to the middle pillar. The idea is you can equally take from the right and the left. That's pretty much what I have prepared. It could have been a little bit longer, I understand, but I also didn't want to get too far into complexities. I wanted to give a brief overlook of the differences and what I actually see as more similarities of differences between the two paths. In the end, it's about attitude, and to me, it really is more whether you're going to honor your social norms and try and fit within them and grow, or where you're going to try and break from them and be a little bit of a rebel. That's what I had prepared for you. I'd love to get a discussion going about it. And also, I don't claim to represent this group or anything other than my own crazed self. So that's my 2 cents. So, questions, comments, noose?
Okay, I just want to say something. Okay, sometimes you meet people, they're on the so-called left-hand path, we're very proud of it. And they always seem to be having the attitude they're superior. I'm on the left-hand path, these are the right-hand, they don't really know the real thing. That's, soft energy, like low voltage and so. So, is that like that, or am I seeing it wrong?
Yeah, that's something I tried to get forth in my talk. I personally, and again, this is just my own personal opinion, I really see very little difference between the two. To some degree, it's an artificial construct. It has its uses, but again, I think if you live in the really real world, you realize that good guys don't always wear white hats, and bad guys don't always wear black hats. So it's something of a synthetic construct, and I think if you cleave to the roots, and it's all that idea about societal norms, a lot of that black magic, white magic stuff kind of gets pushed to the wayside, whereas, in my own personal opinion, is where it belongs.
But I assume the Church of Lucifer is more or less left-hand path, right? I have to ask Shawn. He is the venerable leader.
The Greater Church of Lucifer officially endorses the complete path, which is one of the ways that I like to describe it is that you embrace works of light, but you also have a courageous exploration of the darkness as well. And so that's the complete path there. A lot of times when you have people talking about the right-hand path and the left-hand path, a lot of times they think of the right-hand path as almost like the path of the saint. And they automatically assume, just because of the language, right and left, that the left-hand path is the complete opposite. And therefore would be the path of the sinner, I guess. But that's not how it really works in real life. In real life, we're real people, and we have, loved ones, people that we love and care about, and it's not just all about being evil. That's more of like a grade school or horror movie version of Satanism or whatever, where you would embrace things simply because they're considered evil, So I think, the Greater Church of Lucifer officially endorses the complete path where, like I said, embrace works of light and exploration of the dark side of nature.
Like last time, there was a guy there, he's not here today. Before you came, when we just talked, he said, oh yeah, he's very fascinated with the Clippers, then he just wants to study that, he doesn't want to study the Kabbalah. I mentioned him, it's part of the Kabbalah anyway, right? Wouldn't it be better first to have a know the basic principles.
Yeah.
And the clipboard is also negative. They call, the liars, the obscene ones,
Yeah. Well, actually.
So what would be the fascination of all this?
Yeah, actually, there was a talk last time that Darren gave, and he was saying that it's important. It's people will be drawn toward one or the other in particular, but it's almost like if you're drawn to one, it's more important to work on the other because it's the thing that you kind of maybe need to work on more because you're more comfortable with one, and so you can kind of get complacent in a sense if you focus on the one thing that you find more interesting or more stimulating or more comforting even. The other one is something that you should probably explore.
And then, no, just on another thing is, okay, let's say if you read, what's his name, Stephen Flowers, the left-hand part, when they explain, you stay an individual, right? And then he explained the same thing with the Buddhism there. And then, on the other one, you get absorbed in the Godhead. And then somebody that chooses to be on the left-hand part, or Stephen Flowers, anybody can guarantee him that he won't be absorbed in it. It's just an idea, right? Nobody has ever proven that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Has proven?
No, I'm agreeing with you
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean,
It's just an
nobody
idea,
knows.
right? We don't
Yeah.
really know, right?
Nobody knows what happens after you die because you're dead.
Right.
You can't tell
Yeah.
people. Well, I mean, some people claim to talk to the dead or whatever, but there's always some other explanation that could be why they're getting that type of information or whatever. It could just all be from within a part of themselves. So yeah, I think like Shawn was saying, it's more of an attitude toward the work. A lot of most of the work that you're doing is the same for both. If you're if you consider yourself right hand path and left hand path or complete path, that most of the time the exercises and practices you're doing are often identical.
Yep.
It's more of the attitude you have while doing it, or potentially the goals you're trying to reach with those practices.
Anyway, that's my 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was interesting that you touched on where it comes from in Hinduism, because now that we have this context about it being about breaking taboos and social norms, it's interesting because when I read a lot of left-hand path literature, there's this recurring theme of individuality and liberation from the sort of slave mentality in a way that culture can impose on us. Not that culture's a bad thing, but just that when you're born, you're kind of conditioned to believe certain things, to accept certain things, and to just go with the flow a lot of times. And so it's interesting that it's more about you can see how the whole idea of breaking taboos really applies to modern left-hand path occultism, which is basically often about rejecting things that are taken for granted a lot in occultism and trying to go a more individual way.
I think most people, all people, I would argue, actually requires a little bit of both to be a complete person. I mean, if you equate the right-handed path with more societal norms, taboos, rules, if you never have those at all and you just were iconoclastic from birth, you would have no matrix to grow in. You actually need restrictions. Think about when you're a child. You need all this stuff as a kind of framework and structure for you to explore the world safely. Then when you become a little bit more mature and maybe able to take responsibility for your actions and your non-actions, then perhaps it's time to maybe start questioning things. Maybe, well, I've always been told this is right for me, but I'm going to try the opposite and see how it goes. And I think if you keep an open mind, again, it's that idea of following a complete path. There's no just because you do something left-handed, quote unquote, for a week or two or a year or two, doesn't mean that you are irrevocably, the die is cast, you are now touched by the Sith and you can never be a Jedi. You know what I mean? There's some truth to that. You can change as soon as you want, and maybe after doing some breaking down of barriers or being a little bit of a hellraiser and a rebel, maybe it's time to get conservative again, sit back, lick your wounds, and see what happened. I really do see, it's almost like the Greeks had the idea of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Or the Celts had the idea of the Scythian the Seelie and the Unseelie courts. That whole idea that you have, it's duality. You have the dark path, you have the light path, but realistically we all live in the real world where both hit you at the same time.
Yeah. Another thing that what you just said reminded me of is there was a lecture series that Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, gave, and in that he actually used the terms left-hand path and right-hand path. And what he said was basically that the right-hand path is the social, norms and institutions that you're raised within, and that the left-hand path was actually the path of the hero that he talks about a lot, which is that you essentially you're part of that. So you're raised within that system, but then at some point you become an outsider and go on this journey. And explore things that were not within that initial. You look outside the box in a sense, and then you conquer and learn and then you come back and you enrich that society or culture that you came from with what you've learned on that journey of the hero. And so it all comes back full circle, and then that's how the entire culture can grow, just from a couple people doing that and learning and bringing it back.
Or can I have a side note on that?
Yeah.
Like the Mennonites, the Amish people in Kitchener, they have a system like that, right? They give them, when they are 17, 18, they give them a period for 5-6 years to call it Rumspringen in German. You can run around. They take the carbs off, buy a car, go to the town, all kinds of different sects. And then 5 years, many come back and they go, whatever they learn, they absorb it, but they go back. Horse and buggy.
Yeah,
so maybe they have an influence like that.
But
That's really
in a lot of them, the women, even during Rumspringa, the girls get a lot less freedom than the guys. So when the guys go out there and do their wild thing, the girls are kind of restricted, so they get drawn back because the girls are not allowed to go out as much.
Yeah,
as
but
the
that's
guys.
less and less now. I watch some stuff on YouTube. The girls are quite open now.
Oh, are they? Yeah,
No,
because
you look it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
'cause a lot depends on which elders you have too, but
Yeah.
a lot of them, the girls are still more restricted.
Less and less. I
Yeah,
would
'cause
say
they're being
what I-
And there's an episode like the one, My Name is Earl, the TV show, when guys tried to repair his karma and took advantage, Jerry took advantage of the Mennonite girls, or I don't know what they were in the story, but he wanted to repair his karma. It's that TV show.
I think the Mennonites, the difference between the Amish and Mennonites is the Mennonites do embrace modern technology.
Different groups they have, Some
Yeah.
of them can drive cars. but
Yeah, the
Some-
Mennonites are more modern, I think, whereas the Amish are very much, they don't allow anything electrical unless you're doing the Rumspringer, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. That's typically how it works.
I think the Mennonites have different sects. Some are very strict.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. I think more Mennonites that I see, they're a lot more modern than you would see. But the Amish are not at all. They're still, they live like they're in the Dark Ages.
To also press upon, I was trying to also press upon the idea that a lot of the so-called aggregates that have come about in the right-handed path and left-handed path are exactly that. They're a little bit false. Like a lot of modern occultists seem to be of the opinion that all left-hand pathers are interested strictly in self-deification, or all right-handed pathers are hoping to be absorbed into the Godhead and basically become nothing again because they're rejoined with everything. But I tried to make the case of, for example, people that took the Bodhisattva vow, they are refusing to be absorbed into that Godhead until everyone comes with them. So that is kind of that means that they're hoping to stay behind, keep some level of their will and self-identity after death. That would be technically, according to modern interpretations, that would be a left-handed path practice, but I don't think many people would associate anything particularly Buddhist with the left-hand path. Similarly, while I don't know of any specific examples I could cite, I'm sure there would be people that would be considered satanic or left-hand path who might take a more deistic stance and hope to get reunited with the Godhead of the infernal realm. So I think there could be right-handed people, right-hand path practitioners that have more of a left-handed path goal in mind, and vice versa. It's, again, like everything else, it's a man-made structure. It kind of works for what it is, but understand that, you know, you don't become one thing just because you dip into it.
Yeah, and getting back to the Bodhisattva thing, it's interesting. I feel that Luciferianism in particular, out of what's normally considered left-hand paths, Luciferian is considered one, but it's a lot of people think of left-hand path as a very selfish way of approaching occultism or esotericism, or even just your lifestyle. But within Luciferianism, you have that goal of leaving the world better off than you found it. It's the bringing of the light. I mean, if you look at the light bearer archetype, oftentimes, it's the light bearer who's giving this forbidden knowledge to empower others, often at great risk to their own, to themselves.
Prometheus.
If not getting,
Prometheus.
I was about to say, getting your liver pecked out on a rock. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Prometheus, the serpent in Eden.
Yeah.
He, brought them forbidden knowledge and was punished for it, and it's
Loki
there's a
strapped to the
selfish-
rock.
Yeah.
Every culture has their own version of that.
Yeah, Odin, losing an eye.
Again, if you want to go with good exemplary methods of who would be a good representation of a right-hand path approach and a left-hand approach, go right to the Bible and go with Cain and Abel. I mean, Abel is clearly kind of a figure that could be attributed to everything right-hand path, and Cain the left.
So yeah, the lines are a bit blurred.
It's always the problem when you're dealing with duality.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
again, it's when you're dealing with duality, always keep in mind that you're dealing with polar opposites, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Shawn, for that and for the discussion that you helped spark there, and everyone else. And so we're going to move on to the next talk. Sfinga.
Hello, everyone. Before I begin, I just want to take a moment to thank Jeremy for inviting me to speak. I really enjoy going out and meeting other people at various magic and occult-related events in Toronto. I think it's really amazing that the Greater Church of Lucifer hosts these meetings where different people from all sorts of different magical backgrounds can hang out, discuss, and be exposed to different opinions and views. So once again, thank you. I'm really flattered, more than a little nervous, and quite excited. And I hope everyone here will enjoy the presentation. So my name is Sfinga. That is a magical pseudonym meaning Sphinx in Serbian. I'm from the Balkans, Serbia specifically, and currently I'm a second-year student at the University of Toronto. I'm studying ancient philosophy. I'm a witch. I practice a spirit form of traditional witchcraft, and magically outside the craft I'm interested in hermetics, medieval and Renaissance grimoires, thelema, and various forms of divination. If you're familiar with the works of Jason Miller, I'm a member of his Strategic Sorcery course. So today I'll be giving a presentation comparing the Holy Guardian Angel from the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, a concept or entity I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, and the familiar spirit of witchcraft as it is conceived of in modern traditional craft movements. The key phrase here is as it is conceived of in modern traditional craft movements. I'm going to have to primarily go over what traditional craft means in the context and what it constitutes greatly. Something I feel is important is the word traditional in magic tends to invoke this image of this unbroken lineage of historical heritage. And conversely, the term familiar spirit for most people evokes the image of a black cat that's alive. Neither of which I mean by their use. I will then talk about these two kinds of spirits and their relative similarities. So let's start off with this really nasty term that is traditional witchcraft. Tradcraft is a descriptor that's been frequent use ever since Wicca was founded by Gerald Gardner, particularly in opposition by witches who suddenly found themselves needing a label for their art so that they could define it as a distinctly separate practice from Wicca. Unfortunately, that means a lot of times when you pick up a book written by a modern trad witch, the introduction section tends to almost always begin with this semi-adversarial, passive-aggressive explanation of why tradcraft definitely isn't Wicca, as opposed to getting right to what it actually is.
So what kind of craft are you?
I said traditional craft. I'm going to explain it.
Traditional craft, they
yeah.
call it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a term that's currently being used. So, and again, they tend to do this instead of going into right what it is. And what it is a myriad. It's this kaleidoscope. The popular traditional craft author Michael Howard defines the practice as, quote, any non-Gardnerian, non-Alexandrian, non-Wiccan, or pre-modern form of the craft, especially if it has been inspired by historical forms of witchcraft and folk magic, end quote. But personally, I find this to be rather peculiar, because if you look for forms of the craft that take their inspiration from folk magic and historical witchcraft, then Gardnerian Wicca absolutely fits the bill. Although, of course, Howard excludes it a priori. I found that in a lot of works that I read, there's a really strong anti-Wiccan sentiment, as there's this bad habit of equating anything Wiccan with commercialism, feel-good pop paganism, and instant spells. Yeah. However, of course, Gardnerian Wicca is initiation-based, and it's oath-bound, meaning non-initiates can't accurately claim to know what it's about. Similarly, I don't really agree with this all-pervasive statement that traditional craft is anything but Wicca, but that's another story for another time. Defining traditional witchcraft is a bit of a Herculean task. If I was a Wiccan from a particular splinter tradition, I could talk about coven structure, deities, ethical philosophy, and generally agreed upon communal tenets, and any Wiccan from that tradition would basically agree. But if I was to talk about my personal practice as a traditional witch, I can only really guarantee my own coven members would nod their heads. So when you pick up a book by a trad author, the tenets of the practice are only really going to be consistent with other books by that same author. And so you can expect collaborations and anthologies to go back and forth. One person is working with 3 deities and 3 deities only. Another person is borrowing way more heavily from Norse paganism and the practices of the Volvas. And right after that is a pantheist and maybe even a Luciferian. So why bother with the name? For a craft that was often referred to as the nameless art, why have a label anyway to encompass something so broad? My only answer is that a tradition is a living, organic thing. And it's tradition that I look to, not historical reenactment. My craft is heavily influenced by the folklore and history of my homeland, both logistically in regards to how I work my magic and philosophically in how I conceive of myself. There's this sort of folkloric checklist in the Balkans, and to tell if a baby's been born as a certain cultural seer or shaman, and my birth ended up kind of checking off everything on the list. However, I can't call myself a traditional Balkan witch, only a traditional witch from the Balkans, because I'm not living in the countryside right now supplying herbal remedies and casting out weather demons. I live in Toronto. I'm going into university. Here I have access and exposure to the writings of hundreds of different occult writers from all walks of life. The place I get most of my herbs and candles sells a lot of hoodoo supplies. I've met and worked with a lot of people from Afro-Caribbean religions, Selimites, Neo-Wiccans, and Grimoire traditionalists, and every time I've come across new ideas, they've left their mark on me. Tradition is never divorced from the individuals that are living it. It can only ever change and grow with the circumstances of those who carry it, and it can only reflect their lived experience. This is why it's so hard to pin down. But none of that means that the words I'm using are empty and without substance. So there is a general consensus that is held, otherwise no one would be comfortable labeling themselves a trad witch because it wouldn't convey anything, it would be an empty term. So let's get right to it. Generally, traditional witches tend to view witchcraft as a skill or a literal craft, as opposed to a neo-pagan religion. Similarly, the corpus of information that these witches tend to draw upon to form a basis for their practice tends to be more academic than not, with particular focus on archaeology, anthropology, and history. Some forms are well established and can be sourced to particular founders, such as the followers of the Robert Cochrane-derived streams, Victor and Cora Anderson's fairy traditions, and those who are part of Cultus Sabati and adhere to the works of Andrew Chumbly and Daniel Schulk. Others are entirely based in a broader culture, such as Cornish, Balkan, Italian, and so on. And almost always there is an emphasis placed on altered states in trance, traversing into the underworld at the crossroads, astral shape-shifting, necromancy, communication with spirit helpers, and usually some form of ancestral veneration. Additionally, the lore of the wild hunt, the fairy faith, the sabbat, the hornmaster, and historical accounts of cunning folk who were European folk healers that used both Christian psalms and fairy witchcraft to heal, bless, and sometimes curse. And of course, the witch trials play very important roles for self-definition. It is rooted in the earth and the land, but not bound to it. Essentially what I'm getting at is that this kind of witchcraft that I'm referring to isn't a religion, but rather a literal craft that can be anthropologically identified in many different cultures, deriving from certain shared principles with lots of room for culturally contextual differences. A witch is a kind of magical specialist who knows how to talk to, summon, and bind spirits, leave her body to fly astrally in other worlds, work operative magic for various goals, and heal. The only reason I'm comfortable using this very broad term for myself is because presently in modern writing, it is the term that is being used to define these kinds of non-Wiccan witches, and it's the easiest way to communicate what I do. It doesn't mean that a Wiccan can't practice this kind of craft, or that by virtue of being a Wiccan, they just don't qualify. Many Wiccans happily blend these practices with, and all these things and more. The term just happens to be useful right now, for self-definition, because for most people, Wicca and witchcraft are interchangeable, and that's not really the case. Ultimately, it's all that it is a useful term. I think that getting hung up on labels can be a little misleading, as it's what you're actually doing that matters. I'm practicing a form of craft that's heavily influenced by historical and anthropological accounts of witchcraft and its accompanying narratives. It has very strong pre-modern ties, but I wouldn't call it definitively pre-modern, because like I said before, tradition lives in the individuals who carry it, and by virtue of its surroundings, it's going to evolve and integrate concepts of ceremonial magic, hoodoo, and maybe even Wicca itself. Historical purity is not a really useful goal. So Sabbats, astral flight, shape-shifting, necromancy, the devil at the crossroads, and operative magic. It's all these things and more that I refer to when I talk about witchcraft. And among this myriad of beliefs, practices, and lore, the concept of a familiar spirit is one of the most mysterious and prominent. The familiar is one of the many spirits the witch may potentially work with, but it is by far the most intimate. Sometimes you attract it and woo it to come to you by exercising your powers and spiritually growing until the point where you're ready to meet them. Other times, they come to you in dreams and visions and make the first move. Often it's the Hornmaster, who is the devil at the crossroads and the light-bringing scion of ascent and wisdom, and passing the sacred flame of initiation into you and kindling your individual nature also introduces you to them. The relationship between yourself and your familiar can express itself in a number of different ways, with the bond ultimately encompassing precisely what is most complementary and beneficial for your growth and spiritual development. Some familiars play a role much akin to a parent. Others are this ever-watchful teacher and guardian, and some familiars play a role that's much like a monogamous lover who engages with astral sex. Whatever this bond manifests as, the familiar spirit is your personal guide, tutor, and initiator into the inner mysteries. It negotiates with other spirits on your behalf, aids you in your magic and divination, protects you from attacks, and also performs practical duties, such as informing you about the true natures of spirits you've met, are they even real, and alerting you of things you haven't noticed, and acting as a sort of sober second opinion when it comes to things magical. So this is a particular topic in modern traditional witchcraft that's often very well explored and discussed within circles, but if anyone is really interested in talking about it from a more historical standpoint, looking at it especially in England, I'd highly recommend Emma Wilby's Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits. It's a fantastic book that traces the history of familiars from before the witch trials and different ways that they were expressed themselves, the relationships they had with their pupils, and how arbitrary the line between fairy and demon was in the eyes of the Christian inquisitors who persecuted witches and cunning folk alike. But back to the spirit right now. Evidently, the familiar is generally conceived of as being an external, independent spirit and not really a fragment of yourself, such as a higher self. But it is intimately connected to you and is your familiar for a reason. Other spirits may come and go and choose to help other witches once they've imparted their wisdom unto you, but the familiar remains with you basically eternally. Because of the personal nature of the bond, it's important to understand that while we can talk about what the familiar does for individuals who have experienced this relationship, we cannot 100% empirically talk about what it is with the same intimacy. Conceptions vary as much as the individuals themselves, and arguably this is very similar to the idea of a holy guardian angel. I don't want to preach to the choir when it comes to HGAs. Most of you are probably well aware of the term, as I've said before, but a really quick overview. The term comes from Abraham of Worms, the sacred magic for Abramelin the Mage. The text was made popular by Samuel Little MacGregor Mathers' translation. Aleister Crowley popularized the idea in his writings as well. It's often conceived of as being a sort of silent self who represents the magician's true divine nature, or is the magician himself made perfect. Hence why it's usually linked to concepts such as the genius or the daemon. Whether or not it really is the individual's higher self or a completely independent and separate being who chooses to enter this intimate relationship with the magician because their soul frequencies or their wills are in some way bound in this unique way is incredibly up to debate, and that debate will probably never be solved. Crowley himself advocated for this former higher self view for the majority of his life until around his late 60s, until in Magic Without Tears he argued with the opposite, saying that the HGAs, and I quote, "something more than a man, possibly a being who has already passed through the stage of humanity, and his particular intimate relationship with his client is that of friendship, of community, of brotherhood or fatherhood. He is not, let me say with emphasis, a mere abstraction from yourself, and that is why I've insisted rather heavily that the term high self or higher self implies a damnable heresy and a dangerous delusion." End quote. It's really interesting here that he says the angel may have once been a human too, perhaps a magician who has already risen to great heights, as some witches also see their familiars as being witches who lived in the past, and choose to take them on as apprentices now. But every occult author whom I've read that firmly believes that the HGA is a separate being and not the higher self has also expressed that it is so intimately tied to the magician that it is not entirely apart from him either, in the sense that the angel cannot choose to be someone else's guardian because it has no desire to. It knows you better than you do, it can be regarded as a sort of missing link between you and the most divine, and for those of you who disagree with the idea that there is a missing link at all, it could be an inseparable ally who aids you in furthering your own inherent divinity. Ultimately, nobody can tell you what it is or isn't, because the only way you can really know is by meeting the angel yourself. However, what remains true about this guardian is all throughout is that, and I'm quoting an essay by Jason Miller called 9 Pieces of Hard Advice for Those Seeking Their Holy Guardian Angel, quote, "If it only tells you what you already know and offers you things you already want to do, it is not your angel." End quote. It's there to guide you on your path, to challenge you, and to call you out on your nonsense and stupidity. The familiar spirit behaves precisely the same way. So far, I've been talking about the familiar and the HGA independently, bringing to light shared qualities that these particular spirits have because of the similar roles they play for their individual magicians. However, I do want to note something which has been a recurring theme throughout this entire presentation. Nothing that can be said about either is constant, unchanging, and 100% applicable to everyone. I just want to talk a little about the two and show the similarities because, as I said before, when usually I say witch is familiar, people tend to think of a living animal who helps the witch in some way, and these are usually lesser spirits that historically were often referred to as imps, who took on the forms of animals and assisted witches. But I do not wish to express that I believe that the HG and the familiar are one and the same, because that would be missing the point of this talk. Rather, that they quite possibly could be, in the sense that maybe it's the same role being played for adepts of completely different magical persuasions. A familiar is a witch's holy guardian angel, and a holy guardian is a magician's familiar. Or maybe they're entirely different, and in the sense that they come from different spiritual sources, and they just happen to play similar roles, but fundamentally they're not the same. The only way you could ever really know is to seek them both out. Perhaps some witches, upon performing Liber Samic, find out that their familiar is the only being that responds. Others find a completely different spirit and realize that their familiar is pretty much only for witchcraft and nothing else. A magician who has achieved knowledge and conversation and later becomes initiated as a traditional witch may experience much the same. The very concept of this intimate, personal guardian and tutor is not exclusive to witchcraft or Abramelin, the mage. You might find it in all sorts of different religions, mythologies, and cultures. But just because these spirits play similar roles for different adepts, doesn't mean they're fundamentally the same thing. However, the exceedingly personal nature of the way these guardians manifest, and how tailored their presentation is to suit their partner's growth, means that it may very well be the case that for some and not others. And none of this is even getting to all the other conceptions of the holy guardian angel that aren't necessarily a right-hand path. There's this common idea that the more you talk about these personal guardians and tutelary spirits, the more misconception you show, simply because it's so personal, and it's important not to cling firmly to any preconceived notions if you haven't met them yet. I think it's crucial to keep an open mind no matter where you are on your personal journey. I can only really speak from my perspective, and I've tried to keep this as general and basic as possible for the sake of clarity. I don't have concrete answers about these spirits, and frankly, I would be very wary of anyone claiming to have them because of how intimate and personal this is. And because that just may be how their particular guardian manifests for them, and that's the best way for them to progress. That's not to say that everything is subjective in occultism, and that there is no common ground whatsoever, just that we should prioritize being open and honest about what we know and what we do know right now. As a witch, I've met my familiar spirit, and I work with him daily. I definitely see him as being an independent and separate, but intimately connected being. Other witches, seeing theirs differently doesn't disregard or invalidate my experience in the slightest. However, if Alexander Chumbly and Crowley can change his mind when he's in his 60s, I'm sure I have a lot of time to do so as well, if the evidence turns out to be that way, and ultimately that's fine with me. I'm not interested in remaining intellectually and spiritually stagnant for the sake of consistency. I'm interested in the truth. Who knows what happens when you cross the abyss? And that's really what I wanted to communicate today. Just because some things are subjective doesn't mean there isn't an underlying consistent truth. No matter where we are, it's crucial to keep open to new possibilities. And perhaps when it comes to our spiritual journeys, whatever paths we take, there's always that very peculiar possibility that we're never really on that journey alone. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Did you hear how many times I stuttered? Wow. Aw, thank you.
Well,
Thank you. Appreciate that. Oh, please. So any questions?
What store do you go to?
Huh?
What store?
Store?
You were saying where you buy your herbs and stuff.
Oh, it's called International Herbs.
Okay.
It's near Kensington Market. It sells primarily like hoodoo supplies. It's really good.
You spoke of some of the similarities between the familiar spirit as you see it in traditional witchcraft and the Holy Guardian Angel. Do you have any thoughts on differences?
For sure.
That have been cited between the two?
Yeah. The familiar is generally often seen as way more being an independent spirit. I've mostly read that the Holy Guardian Angel is a sort of higher self aspect, even if, as I said, Crowley disagree with that later on. It's the prevailing sort of idea. But also the familiar is usually, historically, it was conceived of as it comes to you via the devil. That's mostly because the people who are writing about this were like the Christian inquisitors who were, basically talking about the witches that they met. But also that the familiar historically in the book that I quoted is seen as sometimes manifesting really physically. It's not really like an internal process. They spirit in one particular witch, her familiar whose name was Tom, said that he was a person who lived, he died, and now he's in Elfheim, like the fairy world. And she saw him as being really physical. She would ask him for help, and he would bring her herbs that like literally physically give it to her hand, and she would be like, these two people have come to me and they say they lost their keys, and he would go and tell her exactly where to find it and so on. So he gives really practical advice because most of these cunning folk were doing really practical magic. They weren't really like considered to be extremely intellectual sorcerers, But at the same time, and so of course there's this idea as well that you have to somehow like reject Christianity in order to accept the familiar. There's a lot of history behind that, and we're not sure how much of it is made up by the inquisitors and how much the actual witches confessed to organically. As in, like, did it actually, is it actually a demon of some sort? Is it a fairy? For most cunning folk, it was a fairy. That comes from the Queen of Fairies, who has different names in every tradition. But yeah, so again, you can see that it's a little more earthy. There's this idea that it's a little more based around fairy folklore, or perhaps, depending on, which sources you read, it's more demonic. And the Holy Guardian Angel tends to be conceived of as, being really like the magician's higher self, myself made perfect, who's here to like help me on this ascent. And also the idea that when you hop the abyss in like the tree of life, that you eventually lose them and you just kind of become one, and you no longer need the Holy Guardian Angel. It's kind of like a boat taking you there, but you don't need a boat once you're on land.
That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not arguing any of your points at all, but I do know that a lot of traditional Abramelin type operators, like even Crowley himself, also talked about sometimes seeing their Holy Guardian Angel manifest in a physical way. Like he actually he could describe it to like a sketch artist.
Especially when he was writing the Book of the Law, right?
There seems to be. I agree with you that almost always there's that thought that this is myself made perfect, or my higher self, or my future self visiting me in my possible present past. But they also have this idea that it could manifest as a separate entity, as a teacher.
For sure.
Even other people could hear it or hear it dictating. There's different thoughts on it.
For sure. Absolutely. And that's really what I mean. Like, it's so hard to track it down because it's such an intimate experience. But at the same time, what happens when other people can see it? Do you know what I mean? What happens when they can hear it as well and identify it and be like, yeah, it looks exactly like that, and that's exactly what you see as well. It trespasses now into sort of this realm from potentiality and like your personal gnosis into almost a form of objectiveness, because now you have other people bringing it into. And again, it really depends, because like, just because someone says that they're your particular familiar doesn't mean they aren't. Spirits are notorious for lying, especially fairies, and tricking humans. And so that's really why it's so subjective as well. I just wanted to present some findings personally from research.
Does that have any kind of connection with the whole concept of the, like, say, fairy godmother?
Yeah.
Or even just the guardian angel as, not necessarily holy guardian angel, like that's a very specific term, but just how some people believe they have a guardian angel.
Well, yeah, like personal tutors. I think that what makes it a little different is that in some conceptions, in some spiritualities, every human being, by virtue of being alive, has a sort of tutor, a guardian, maybe an animal or some sort. Pardon me. But in witchcraft, the familiar only really comes to witches. Like it's kind of like an exclusive spirit that way, and pardon me, but like you can have other spirits that perform similar functions for you, basically, like smaller animal totems and so on and so forth, or even like perhaps even angels. It depends on who you ask, right? You know, it's just that it's generally conceived of as you have to approach it by first accepting what we like to call the cunning fire. It's like this individual fire that's passed on to you by the spooky devil or perhaps yourself, you know, by nurturing it and fanning it, and your own individuality and your own power, you attract the spirit who's going to want to work with you in that way.
So is it fair to say that everyone probably has this, they're just maybe not aware of it? Or is it the contention that these are created or otherwise contacted beings, and if you don't do the work, you don't got the connection?
I don't know. It's true. It's because that's what I mean, really. Like, I would be wary of anyone who says that they would know, right? You know, and in some religious frameworks, everyone has a particular little guardian, right? You know,
A lot of modernists also equate the holy guardian angel with the shadow self. And
Yeah.
certainly if you agree with
if you're
Jungian
interested,
concepts,
Jungian,
everyone
yeah,
has that, so.
yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like, and some people talk about the supernatural assistant from like I believe the Greek magical papyri, and. And also like other forms, and even like the Greek algodeas. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but basically the question is: are those the same? Are they different? Are they just similar functions we perform by different classes? We don't really know. I don't really know. You know, it's just it's a really personal thing, and who knows what you end up experiencing. I don't want to say that everything is always subjective, just that it requires a lot of rigorous interrogation, a lot of cross-referencing to even like get an idea.
I'm glad the mystery has not been solved yet. Like I'm not sure, you know, like a traditional OTO person would say it's your higher self. But I always thought I have a separate agent. I don't know it. Like
Who knows? And
okay.
yeah, and that's really what I mean, like keeping yourself open. And like I said, if Kohler can change his mind in his 60s, then I sure can. You know, I have lots of room. And it's all about not really clinging so hard to something, even if that's what seems perfectly right now. It's like I conceive of the familiar as being independent and separate and completely like different from as intelligence for me. But if that's not true and that's just maybe an illusion, and later on I realize something different, I'm fine with that, right? It's all about just looking for the truth and not clinging so hard to things that make me feel good at this time.
I know Bornless ritual, as it was made popular by some members of the Golden Dawn and Crowley, it was actually changed a fair bit from its original frame form that you see in the I believe it's the Leyden papyrus, some of the PGI. But I know in the original source material, these were clearly viewed as separate entities. They were tutelary spirits, and in most, I've seen different versions of this type of operation, and in most of the Greek papyri, they would talk about actually taking an animal such as a cat or an eagle and actually slaying it as part of the rite, and with the idea that that was either a sacrifice to the entity,
so it could manifest
or
better.
actually the spirit of the animal you had released became your familiar, so to speak. It's kind of an interesting tidbit.
For sure.
That kind of reminds me of a concept that I only actually heard about recently, a grim. Have you heard of a grim? It's supposed to be like when a church is built and established, the first person that is buried in the graveyard associated with that church, that spirit kind of becomes trapped in a sense and acts as the guardian of that particular church. And protector, caretaker, and that in some cases they
kind of like a Gregor for
yeah, but it's a specific soul, and that in some cases, in order to prevent somebody from having to be that they would sacrifice an animal, sometimes a black dog, and bury it, and then that would become and sometimes people would see like
The shadow of a black dog protecting the
Exactly.
graveyard. Yeah, and I mean the idea of a land guardian is really popular. Usually like sometimes a guardian that protects a particular tribe of people, a particular village. A land spirit that protects a particular mountain range. Like we see these kind of guardians who, in mythology, who stand like pretty much in any place that has a boundary. Sometimes they're hostile to humans, sometimes they're hostile to foreign humans and not their humans, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, often like the church dog or the black shuck who kind of protects the guard is there to prevent it so the human soul can like basically go to heaven, and then the dog is the one who has to protect the area.
Right. And it also kind of reminds me of there's a legend of pirates. Two people would bury the treasure, and then one of them would kill the other one, and that
To protect the
spirit
treasure?
would become the guardian spirit of that treasure.
It's a good deal.
Not that they would know
As long as
necessarily
I
that
don't
that
kill
was
them.
going to happen, but maybe the captain would bring. You need to come with me, and we're going to bury this treasure.
Sounds a little bit like Pharaohic Egypt, where the people who built the pyramids would be the first people left inside.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you can serve Pharaoh in the afterlife, right? Thank you all again.
If you could unveil that.
I guess you're next.
This is well, we had just the two talks, so yeah, this is closing up. So yeah, I'd like to thank Sfinga for that awesome talk and the discussion that occurred afterward. Yeah, a lot of really cool concepts came up today, and I really enjoyed the discussion that we had. This is something that we're going to try and do every other week, every other Saturday. So what I'd like to happen is for us to have this again. I guess it would be August the 15th, and we'll figure out a venue, and ideally we could get some sort of consistent venue.
Yeah.
Because this is only the third time that we've had this, and so we've grown, and so the first venue and second actually are definitely too small for what we're doing now. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that if people are interested in declaring their resonance with the Greater Church of Lucifer, that we have a ceremony of illumination that we can do. It's a very simple ceremony, and it's absolutely free. It's just, like I said, to kind of formally declare your resonance with the movement, with the GCOL movement. And we can do that. Usually what we would do is, it wouldn't be recorded and put on YouTube, but we would do it before the talks. It's like I said, it's a very simple ceremony, and if anybody wants to, and anybody is welcome to do that. And it doesn't come with any obligations, really. It's just more, like I said, to declare your resonance. So that's something that I wanted to let you know, and I'd like to start doing it at the next meeting. The next one will be just after the new moon, and so I think that's kind of a perfect time to have that kind of a beginning, the beginning of a cycle. So if anybody is wanting to do that, then you can get a hold of me afterwards. Also, because we've gotten big enough now that we have to have a venue that that we book. There's actually expenses now. And so if anybody is wanting to help contribute to that, you can come see me privately afterwards and give me a couple dollars or whatever you want, or nothing at all. This is an absolutely free event, and there's no obligation. It's just I wanted to put that out there in case you do want to contribute to the ongoing expenses, that you can just come to me privately and I'll put it down as a donation. Also, I wanted to invite everyone here to come out with us. We're gonna go out and we can continue the conversation on a less formal level. at a local restaurant, and we can decide, like once we have a more stable venue, we might get a stable after party place. But we'll figure something out, and we can go somewhere and maybe have a bit of food and continue the conversation there. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, especially considering it's a holiday weekend. And yeah, that's it.